For me personally, I'm super excited. I mean, space tech is one of those conversations where you think about obviously astronauts in space, right? But then there are so many different applications of this. It's much bigger than this. It's much bigger than, I guess, shooting people off into space. And this is what we are discussing in this session, and how it's actually applied in Africa, right? So just to give you a gist about where the other parts of ABAWT come in, I spoke about community. That's why this session is happening. We are able to connect entrepreneurs on the continent, and also discussions about different avenues of tech, agri-tech, fintech, and now space tech, as you can see. But there's a mentorship section as well as a startup support section as well that we're building up. And for mentorship, please reach out if you'd like to be part of the mentorship programs, where we mentor entrepreneurs on the continent, and startup support if you have ideas that you like to bootstrap in Africa. So without further ado, I've probably spoken quite a bit. I'd like to jump into the thick of this, right, into the conversation. Actually, before I start, wait, something Zoom just kicked off. I'm trying to see if I can find out where the audio is coming from. I think it's this one, the J. No, let me see if I can kick him out. I don't know, Saskia, do you know if you can kick, or Jules? I think it's Jules. Can you please mute your mic?
Hold on.
Okay. Oh yeah, much better. Wow, yeah. I can hear a lot better now. Awesome. So without further ado, I hope you heard the best part of this, like the introduction. But without further ado, I'd like to jump into the panel and kick off with our four amazing panelists. So what I'll do actually, I know with typical protocol moderation, I have to give the quick soundbite introduction of the speakers, but I personally believe they can do a lot better introducing themselves. So I'll probably kick off with our panel, and then they can introduce themselves. So maybe I'll kick off with Charles Mwangi. If you can give us a quick introduction to yourself for the panel, please.
Thank you, Manu. I'll try to keep it short. So my name is Charles Mwangi. I am a Kenyan. I am currently working at the Kenya Space Agency. I am leading the research, education, and outreach. I represent the agency in a number of bodies, one of which is a program board that looks at applications of Earth observation. I support a number of projects, one of which is environmental education for schools. I would also say I was part of the team that developed the first Kenyan nano satellite, which was launched in space in 2018. And I have interest in space, in citizen science as well. And have varied, my background is essentially in electrical engineering, controlled engineering. I have diversified to satellite engineering and as well as remote sensing and geographical information system. So back to you, Manu.
Thanks, Charles. Maybe I'll move over to David. Oni.
Okay. Hi, everyone. My name is David Oni. I'm Nigerian. I currently work as an analyst at Space in Africa. Well, I sort of double as an analyst and then a data analyst, because as an industry analyst rather. So we basically take sections or segments of the African space industry and then analysis of those industries. Sometimes we make predictions based on the data that we currently have, and sometimes we also do consultancy for several agencies such as government bodies, private companies, and we're also responsible for news and basically everything that happens around the African space industry. So yes, you can call us the go-to people for anything concerning space in Africa.
Thank you, David. I'm moving to Guido. You can give us something also third panelist for the event.
Yes, hi, good evening. My name is Guido. First of all, very happy to be with you tonight. I'm working in the field of space since a long time, a decade by now. And I was always fascinating about the opportunities that Africa is offering in that context. That made me get actually the possibility to become part as a director of the Foundation for Space Development in Africa. And in there, I'm looking in particular after the further development and promotion of new space activities across the continent, and to give others outside of the continent the possibility to see the potential that exists. And I'm also pretty engaged into promoting STEM activities amongst the youth in Southern Africa, because this is the next generation of space enthusiasts, as we always say, and they will really make a difference.
Thank you, Guido. And last but not least, Oluseyi, our fourth panelist for the event. I think Oluseyi was having some issues before with his internet connection, so his video might not be on, but he's definitely a panelist. Oluseyi, can you say hi?
So, hi. I think the noise came also from me. This is Saskia, part of the ABAWT group. So Oluseyi said that his internet is really spotty, so he asked to apologize, or we should apologize for him. We're trying. He's already in the group, but I think he has issues hearing us and seeing us, and because the video is off, I cannot spotlight him. So I think as soon as his internet is back on, I think we'll pop him into the conversation and give an introduction of him.
Cool. Thanks, Saskia, for the update. Also, it's a bit funny to see my face speak to me as well as a background, but all good. So then I'll jump into it. Like Saskia said, Oluseyi, he is the fourth panelist for the event. He'll join us later, but he is an African partner and board member of Gen Space, and he'll tell us a bit more about it when he joins. But happy to start this conversation. I mean, one thing, like I said, is one of those dreams where you think about when you think about space in general, and then when you think about space tech, right? You have this vision of astronauts in space. It's the first application of space you think about for most of us here, and I had to actually educate myself on the vast mass of applications and space tech. And it'll be nice to hear actually from our panelists how they actually have their applications in space from their various angles, right? And maybe I'll throw the first question to Charles here regarding what application of space you have and what you're currently using space tech for.
Thank you, Manu, and again, pleasure to be here. When you're looking at the space sector, when you're looking at it, we majorly look at it in two dimensions. There's what we call the upstream sector, and then there's a downstream sector. The upstream sector, you're looking at launch systems, launch vehicles, satellites, and systems that support the launch. Then when you're looking at the downstream, then you're looking at applications that you derive from those systems. Here you're looking at, again, just to give an indication, the upstream would be an example of an Earth observation satellite. An application that you derive from that would be something that you use for navigation when you're using satellite navigation. Google Maps will be a very good example. Earth observation will be if you're using precision agriculture, or if you're using maps for agriculture, where you're doing crop yield estimation, or you're doing precision agriculture, issues of monitoring the forests, issues of disaster management. So the whole spectrum, it's pretty wide. And like Manu, you mentioned, when you think about space, what comes to mind is the component of an astronaut going to the moon. But I think that is the one that stimulated some interest around the space. But it cuts across many sectors. And we were having a conversation with Guido earlier when you're saying that many people don't know that this is the origin of Africa, is the origin of where it all started. And maybe Guido, you can give that insight.
Yeah, with pleasure. Yeah, we were actually discussing that earlier, because You have that wonderful Ariane 5 behind you. So it is, as they say, the European working horse to bring actually those kind of applications into space, which we're calling satellites, to realize the downstream for all of us as a customer at the end of the day. So this launcher is mainly driven by the French. And they actually started with their testing of rocket technology back in the days. That was around end 50s, beginning 60s. In North Africa, in particular Algeria, a bit in Tunisia. And it shows actually a little bit, I don't want to say like the cradle of mankind that is on the continent, but maybe partially the cradle of space in the application of civil usage was done in the north of Africa back in the day. There's many stories like this existing on about the continent. Many people don't know, and it's quite exciting. And I also think it is quite inspiring for a lot of people, and in particular for the youth, because they only seeing what is shown on television today, and unfortunately, this kind of history is too less promoted.
Oh,
I just want to share, Mario, if you allow me, in terms
please.
of, these are some figures that were done in 2016 in terms of the space economy, where they were saying the upstream, where I was talking about the commercial satellite market was being, they were giving an approximate valuation of about 100 billion, over 100 billion. But downstream, we're talking about 200 billion. And when you look at the market, what comes to the fore is, like you mentioned, the satellites, how you launch them. But one thing that you need to be alive to is there are the application that comes into play when you're looking at the market, especially the space market. And I mentioned a few applications on Earth observation.
Thanks, Charles, for that insight. It's also the different angle, I think, regarding David, because David is also working as an analyst in this field and can also report on some more of these numbers, right, David, regarding the balance between downstream and upstream, and then actually the application of tech in space, especially with downstream applications. Can you share some insights there, David? Okay, I think we lost David as well. Seems like we have speedy
Nigerian network, huh? Nigeria
exactly.
is some trouble today.
Yeah, sure.
You're right.
Like
That was. Is that David, or that confused me?
That was David.
That was David. Okay. I think David. Wait, did you hear what I said, or were you able to get the question? Okay. I think we have. You're right. Because David and Oluseyi, both of our panelists are actually based in Nigeria now. Might be having issues in general. But David, if you pick up on the conversation, just let me know. Put your hand up, and then I'll pull you back in. Okay.
Please.
Looks like you.
Here, I was in between switching service providers. Sorry about that.
Oh, good. This seems like this service provider is a lot better than the last one. So, good choice. But the question was more, we were talking about numbers, and Charles and Guido gave us the different angles, right, regarding downstream and upstream. And for most people, when you think about space, you're thinking about upstream. You're thinking about launching rockets into space. But then the vast difference in funding and actually the money that is generated from downstream versus upstream, where upstream, I mean downstream, where you're actually looking at the technologies and applications from being outside of space and then actually looking in is insane, right? And it'll be nice to hear from your perspective as an analyst, how that applies as well from the numbers.
Okay, yeah. So, like Charles rightly said, we have the upstream and the downstream segments of the African space, of the space industry, rather. Sorry about that. But mostly downstream companies or the downstream sector, we have those largely populated around here. That's mainly because it takes a lot more than wanting to run a business to actually venture into the upstream sector, and because there are a lot of technicalities. So downstream players are just concerned about the end use of the product, the applications of space technology, say remote sensing or agri-tech, like Charles rightly mentioned, precision engineering and whatnot. But the upstream sector is majorly concerned about manufacturing, having to put out these services firsthand. For instance, satellite component manufacturing, or it could have propulsion systems and all of that. So yes, from records or from the data we have gathered as analysts at Space in Africa so far, we've been able to deduce that downstream companies are, of course, largely more populated than than upstream companies. And of course, well, the funny part of that is that these upstream companies, I think we might have to eventually get to that, but they are largely concentrated around South Africa. Um, um, Funny, you might want to ask why though. Are there sort of enabling systems in South Africa? Are there easy access to funds in South Africa? Are there so questions like these are questions we ask ourselves as to why many of these upstream companies are concentrated in South Africa and not spread evenly across the continent as downstream segments. So we're beginning to raise conversations around that area as to why that is. Maybe the government enables them. Maybe there are institutions that sustain these sectors of industry. And I believe that in the course of this conversation, of course, we might um, be able to deduce a couple of points from that.
It actually leads beautifully into my next question, because we look at the application of space tech across different countries in Africa, and they vary differently, right? In terms of how they applied, like you said, in South Africa, there seems to be a lot of investment in upstream, and then other applications. I know, for example, Kenya, there's focus on downstream as well, and even the split of funding is varies across technologies and across countries. And my question will be regarding for example, the countries and some of the applications. For example, the bigger leaders, we have South Africa, right? In this regard, I think it will be more directed to Guido first, and then I'll ping back to Charles regarding what that looks like in terms of investment and how and why, for example, South Africa seems to be leading in the satellite upstream in this regard. I know Guido, you're back.
Yeah, this time actually was my net, eh? Oof.
Yeah, was it actually your internet? I thought it was
completely going down. It came back automatically, what was good, but nevertheless.
Okay.
So yeah, there's still a lot of potential for space applications, in particular for downstream. So I mean, with downstream, we have a lot of different applications. The interesting aspect is that South Africa is having a relatively broad portfolio in this regard, in particular because they're producing most of the satellites themselves. That means seriously by engineers from the African continent, designed and manufactured. We have many other countries on the continent who have help from European companies, from Chinese companies, from Russian companies, which is a very common thing, and it has grown over the years even. So what South Africa is now trying to accomplish is that besides the satellite sector on the one side, they also want to go into the upstream area again, because they used to have functioning launch pads 40, 50 years ago, which still existing, and they would like to find ways to reactivate them. There's in particular the University of KwaZulu-Natal, who is from an academical point looking into this. And then you have other startups actually who are thinking, why not copying a little bit what SpaceX did many years ago, and realizing at the end of the day an access to space from an African soil. So I like the two terms, you know, upstream and downstream, but we're always trying to separate them. I think in the case of Africa, we should actually see to bring them together and make out of both full stream, because we're having a representative from the Kenyan Space Agency here, and he's very well aware, even more than myself, that they have a beautiful launch pad and ground station down in Kalinda, and there's a lot of chances actually to combine the upstream and the downstream approach, and actually make it happening from the continent, and not using capacities in other launchers in Russia or China or French Guiana or you name it, right? Yeah.
I think that seems to be directed. Exactly. I was going to say, Charles, you take it off.
I don't know why Giri is not taking credit for Elon Musk and saying that he's South African to begin with. Maybe you need to bring him home. Maybe we could be enjoying these renaissances in Africa if we had Elon Musk in South Africa. But I don't think it would have happened if he was in South Africa. So I think one of the challenges that we have within our continent, and I'm not saying Africa is one big country, we have our own challenges across. Just to draw some figures, and I believe David would also be able to show some, share some. Traditionally, if you look at developing satellite, you are talking about 50 to about $200 million just to develop the satellite. When you're talking of launching now, it varies depending on the size, varying from about $10 million to about $400 million, depending again on the size of the satellite and what you use, the weight of the payload. Those are huge amounts of cash, which I believe South Africa again might have had the resources. Nigeria should have had the resources to be able to get that, and they have a number of satellites going. But again, having said that, we're getting into a space where now we are the technology, and that's partly why you're having this conversation, is allowing other countries to get into space. When you're talking about nano satellites, small satellites that are maybe the size of 10 centimeter, and 10 centimeter cube. A couple of those, when you join them together, you can manufacture that, you can launch that with $1 million. So that will change the dynamics. I would say, based on my experience, and again, I stand to be corrected by Guido, the investment in hands-on skills in South Africa is more advanced. In my understanding, their apprenticeship is more advanced, and that is why they're able to do what they're able to do. And the challenge with, I would say, our education system, sometimes we copied too much and we didn't know what we need to do. We didn't have the infrastructure to be able to develop systems that we need to. And maybe those are the conversations that we need to have in terms of, does our education system support the technology that you want to get into? I don't know, maybe Guido can comment on the bit about especially the skill set.
I would love to, because I can tell you 3 years ago, I was at the University of Kenya, Nairobi. And the beauty about this is, and many people don't know, they even have a department for aerospace. So they have interesting machinery over there. I think it got sponsored by China at some stage, but they're looking into this. So they're looking into opening the mind to the people and educating the students to become aerospace engineers, or at least mechanical engineers, or something that is related. The problem is that there's no industry where they can work in. So many actually turning to Kenyan Airways and becoming pilots or ground staff, working on the plane to make them actually, or enable them actually to fly. But the capacities that existing across the continent in different countries, and I have seen it in many countries, in particular from an entrepreneurial side, there's a huge willingness. People want to do this. So they really want to create this kind of satellites that you have described, and there have been many missions. In particular, for instance, QB50, when they even went to the International Space Station with the CubeSats. So what I missed maybe in the beginning was one of the major differences in between Africa and other areas in the world in this context is the satellites are much smaller, as you have just nicely described, because from the beginning onwards, budgets have been, let's say, tight, and there was no chance to create like full-scale satellites like in America, Europe, Russia, you name it. So people concentrated on the smaller satellites, even smaller on the cube and nanos. But the beauty was about those kind of activities that they have been separated in two areas. So a little bit on the academical side, I would say something like 30%. A couple of universities looked into this. At the moment, Ghana is very strong in that area. And the other 70% get dominated by private industry. So at the end of the day, those kind of smaller satellites that now are in orbit around our planet that got developed in Africa, got fully commercialized, developed. There is only a handful that really got launched based on state money. So all the others have been for private customers. And this is unique in the world. Don't get me wrong. This is something that is seriously unique, because only in Africa you will find an almost completely commercialized space sector, even if it is for smaller applications. But it is commercialized. No one else has something like that.
Yeah. Actually, it's funny because I got two strong points from Charles and Guido that I actually would like to feed to David if he's still available. Mainly because the one thing that I picked up from the conversation was first the strong collaboration efforts. Mainly not necessarily like Guido said, South Africa seems to be, let's say, at this stage standing on their own with these collaborations, but then a heavy collaborative efforts with the European countries. Like for example, Kenya, I know there's been strong collaboration with Italy, like with a lot of the satellites, and in the space agency side of stuff. Ghana, I know the last space, the satellite that was launched was with heavy collaboration with Japan, for example. And it's nice to, for example, for David, I'd like to hear from your perspective, especially from an analyst perspective, why this looks like it is, and maybe from a numbers game, what kind of collaborative efforts, if this has dropped, if this is increasing, if you know in this regard. And the other question is also in the field of in education, and it was similar to what he said. And they're two separate big questions, but then I think they're valid for David as well. Is the education in Nigeria, right? Is it also tailored toward really enabling like students be mechanical engineers and be actual space techies going forward?
Well, unlike South Africa, okay,
Yeah, you're back actually. I can see you.
Yeah, thank you. So,
provider.
right. So, unlike South Africa, where we have universities like Stellenbosch University, Cape Peninsula University of Technology, and there's one other one, I can't remember now. But there are a handful of universities based in South Africa who have hardcore satellite technology, who are driven who are technologically driven, and this has helped them to launch some satellites in the past. Some of them have even gone ahead to secure government contracts for future satellites for South Africa. But in Nigeria, so far, only the Federal University of Technology has actually been able to show so much results concerning universities in Africa, and that's because FUTA. I graduated from FUTA, by the way. I studied mining engineering, and and that's because they were responsible for Nigeria's first educational satellite in 2017. So so far there hasn't been anything noteworthy coming from Nigerian institutions. Of course, there are other institutions, there are other space-based institutions, but we can't really call them space technologically based institutions. They are probably just institutions that are based off Earth observations and whatnot, but not really space technologically inclined.
Okay.
What was the other question again, Manu?
And the other question was actually regarding how you see the collaborative efforts between Africa and Europe, especially in other continents, because Ghana has a lot of collaboration with Japan currently with the satellite launches. But nice to see what Nigeria looks like. And then maybe I'll ping quickly back to, I know Guido touched on this topic already, but how Kenya does it with Italy. And then we'll go to the next segue. So.
Okay, so far, because the new space era has changed a lot of things. The new space era has made it possible for almost anybody to be able to launch a satellite these days. In fact, according to our database, we have a satellite as low as about $200,000. I think 100,000, in fact. So it's almost relatively cheap to launch satellites these days. And there's such a thing called the Kibo Q program, where the Japan, some institutes in Japan collaborate with several other African institutions to launch satellites, to build satellites from scratch. So it serves as a two-way thing. Yeah, so it helps these countries launch their own satellites, and then it sort of serves as a knowledge transfer. I think that's what's happening with South Africa. South Africa is booming with ideas. In fact, there's a particular company, Hypernova, I think, that currently wants to start developing propulsion systems, right? So they want to launch the first indigenously made rockets from Africa. So yes, I think that collaborations are the new order of the day when it comes to enabling countries to join the space race. But there's a caveat to it, though. Or there's a catch rather. Many African countries, they are.
I think you muted yourself, or maybe it might be internet issues. Okay, all good.
Oh, sorry about that.
All good, all good.
Yeah,
You're back, so.
So, what was I saying?
I think it was mainly about the collaboration with other countries and continents, right?
But yeah, so it's relatively easy these days to basically enter the satellite industry from Africa if they are willing to collaborate, of course.
I think you're talking about a catch about.
Yeah. Okay, so many space, many African countries, they use their technology to solve immediate problems such as border monitoring, food food prices and whatnot. So I think for many countries, many African countries are not financially equipped to start to take on satellite projects. The most they could do is probably take on maybe an educational satellite or a small satellite. But only very few African countries have actually been able to send really powerful satellites. Such a case is Morocco and then Egypt as well, which also includes a military reconnaissance satellite. So yes, it really varies when it comes to the African context, though.
Yeah. Thank you, David, and I will ping to Charles about that. Yes, please. Okay, go ahead.
I like the discussions where you're talking about collaboration, because one of the challenges we have had as in Africa is we have collaborations where we send our sons to Europe, to Japan to learn how to manufacture. But when they come back, we don't have the infrastructure to support that. Maybe we need first to grow that infrastructure, because when you talk about Ghana, that satellite was developed in Japan. Much of what we developed for Kenya was also done in Italy. And much of even Ethiopia recently launched, but it was manufactured in China. So we need to have conversations in terms of, are we able to develop infrastructure where we're saying, what does South Africa have? What does Kenya have? What does Nigeria have? What does Egypt have? And then we collaborate amongst the African countries, because I'm yet to hear of a collaboration between Africa, and see what resources we can. And then we have to learn, if need be, from the very basics of engineering and satellite engineering, for that case, to be able to go to space. We cannot really adopt technology. We can, yes, but it will be more impactful if you're able to nurture that within our ecosystem.
Agreed. And I actually already see two people in the room that can start this, right? I see Guido and Charles already talking about hardware upstream from South Africa and then downstream from Kenya, already a collaborative effort, right? And actually two people in the room that can make this happen. But this is me for our region, and I think we should have more conversations about this. I mean, David has brought together the numbers, and I think I like Guido's term full stream, right? Instead of separating upstream and downstream, you have this mentality of actually the full cycle of both parties just sitting at the table and saying, why look outside, but then look to South Africa instead. So you're right. I think this conversation should definitely be something we continue going forward. And it's funny, this sounds like the conclusion, right, to the talk, but I actually have a couple more follow-up questions. And it ties into the next part of collaboration, and this is about funding and spending, right? And one thing that is crazy is how vast the spending looks like across different countries. So I pulled a few numbers, and this is from David's report. So David, I know Space in Africa, you published a report last year and you shared with us, and it showed that the spending in South Africa, for example, was 168 million. For Nigeria, 54 million. And this was talking about space budget for 2020. In Kenya, it was 2.8 million. And Zimbabwe, for example, was 164,000, right? And you can see the different variation in spending, or the budgets allocated to space. And it'll be nice to hear, for example, from Guido, how that looks like in South Africa. How come there's so much money allocated to space tech in Africa in this case?
A good question, honestly. I think Charles would also like to know this kind of secret, because indeed, in particular in those days, it's quite interesting to see that South Africa is making this kind of investment, but they have been in a pipeline since long. So the head of SANSA, Munzami, he was always saying we have to, if we want to get serious, we need some investments here, and we have to see that we're better cooperating with private industry. But I would like to come back to the collaborations a little bit into more detail. So I share this. There should be more collaboration on the African continent. There is absolutely no doubt. In particular, because I mean, Kenya is, to my knowledge, collaborating with Italy. That was just renewed currently, the agreement, which is not too bad. What it means at the end of the day, we are all excited to see. Because I think even the launch site, revamping of the launch site was on the cards. So I think if this is going to happening, it would make a lot of sense actually to see even that Kenya is maybe with South Africa getting into a position to offering launch capabilities on the continent with this beautiful location at the equator. So I was having the big pleasure last year at the so-called Cyber EAC, that's the International Astronautical Conference that takes place once a year, to present a paper where I was talking about an African-European Space Alliance. Because yes, I see that there is a need for collaboration on the continent, but I'm also seeing it from a different angle. Because imagine where the countries around the world actually launching today their rockets. You have to know the most optimal position to launch a rocket into space is at the equator. So there's not a lot of countries on that planet who have actually a chance to launch at the equator. So, and the biggest countries that you will find who are actually spending a lot of money in their space activities and who have built really up their reputation in that case, not one is actually located at the equator. So the interesting aspect here is China was just launching this morning, actually, the first part of the new space station, but pretty far away from the equator. So imagine a collaboration where you're using what is there today, but you're revamping it. And then actually you're offering this kind of capabilities to the international community. And you're doing this on a commercial base. So with the money that you're earning, you can actually reinvest it into the industry itself. You can come up with funding schemes. You can come up with venture capital to invest into startups and entrepreneurs in general. You can fund your agencies, and you're actually helping what all of us trying to accomplish. Mr. Biden was just showing it with his new initiative concerning our climate change problem that we're all facing. So because it is also an environmental issue. David will 100% agree, I'm sure, that the predictions for launching capabilities around the planet go through the roof. There are so many launches planned and so many satellites that are supposed to go into space. At some stage, we might actually see that launches getting from almost every location, but it doesn't make sense because it is also a problem with the environmental harm. So Kenya is offering something that not a lot of countries can do, experiences, long-term experiences in launching and in ground station infrastructure. South Africa has the knowledge that was already said a couple of times. And actually what also not many people know, they have a full working launch pad, which also has to be revamped. The the ground infrastructure is still not too bad, but it's not really working. So there also has to be some investment, and I think they're planning this. But if you're putting this kind of collaborations into the picture, and then you're going to get external people who are also deciding to launch from Kenya. Just imagine, I mean, it's like printing the money.
It's nice because we've already gone into solutioning, right? And various ways in which we can actually, for example, collaborations and work together to ensure space tech is as effective, right? I know you touched a bit on green tech, Guido, and I'll even piggyback to that in a second, because I mean, launching into space, everyone understands that, and for people who know the tech, the debris and the mayhem that's going to be caused if there's nothing to actually police this, right? But one thing I wanted to touch on before I actually touched on green tech was how we make space tech more, for example, the challenges we see like funding, collaborations, how we make this happen. So I know one approach to this has been constellations in the past, right? Collaborations and launching. And it'll be nice to hear from you, Charles, regarding what your approach for constellations has been and what your thoughts are regarding other ways of making space tech a lot more vulnerable and reachable. And then I'll probably piggyback the same. I mean, you can hand the baton to David and then back to Guido as well.
Thank you, Mike. So now that Guido has mentioned, we have a launching site in along the coast in Kenya. It hasn't been used for some time. We possibly need to do a lot of retrofitting to ensure that it's up to speed for use for Africa. But of particular importance would be the market to be there. And we have a large African market that could benefit from that, and we could tap into the resources that are available. So I want to look at space in two dimensions. And I want to throw in the component of data. One of the critical elements of even going to space is the data that you generate from that. And currently, there's a saying that says, whoever has data is king. And maybe we need to get to that space. And how do we get to that space? I mentioned earlier that the amount that were needed then to get into space has really gone down. So one of the approaches we could explore as a region, as Africa, is to work on a constellation. I remember when there's a time I was in a conference in Stellenbosch, South Africa, on small satellite. I think it was 2018. And there was discussions on whether even the universities could consider working on a constellation, because one of the challenges we have is if we do not work together. I would give the example of Landsat for those who are coming from the satellite engineering background. When you have a satellite going around the Earth, when you have only one, I'll give the example of Landsat. It means that the satellite takes a bit of time to go back to the same position where it was, what we call the revisit time. Landsat takes 16 days. If you had 2 Landsats, it will take 8 days. If you had 4, it will take 4 days. If you had 16 Landsat, it will take 1 day. Why is that important? If you want to monitor anything that is changing within a day, then you need higher revisit time. The constellation works in a very good way because you would have, if you had, let's say, just for conversation's sake, if we had 5 countries that were working together in Africa, develop a constellation of each 2 satellites, then, or even more, then you would be able to map out Africa more regularly. And that is one of the challenges we have because we're not able to map Africa regularly. When you have the data, then you build up systems. You build up ecosystems around that in terms of data as a service, platform as a service, infrastructure as a service in terms of the data, as well as also software, ingesting that information, being able to grow our ecosystem. You would have startups, you would have incubation centers that are able to use that data. And maybe that is the direction that we need to go as a region. Maybe a few countries would need to get to that. And again, when you go smaller, that means that you can develop launch sites more cheaply, as opposed to the traditional ones that were quite expensive.
Charles. I think the same question to David, actually.
Okay, so I just remember that we actually published a story that was talking about the African resource management constellation, right? So it was supposed to be a collaboration between Algeria, Nigeria, South Africa, and then Kenya. I'm sure that did not work out, as I think only Algeria and Nigeria launched their Earth observation satellites at the time.
Maybe I can comment on that, Danny. So what happened was you had 4 countries that were operating with their different budgets. So it was very difficult to arrange for a time. So usually you have a satellite that has a lifespan of about 5 years. So I think Nigeria, Algeria, and South Africa, they were launching at different times. So one found the other when it was already at the end of life. So there is no coordination across government in terms of when. Maybe that is when you need the African Space Agency to help coordinate some of these. So the constellation was a very good idea. Implementation had its own challenges.
Yes, I was going to talk about the African Space Agency itself. I think it's what Africa needs at this time. So bring together to join the efforts of, instead of having individual efforts, because currently no African country can actually take on any big projects on their own. So I think the African Space Agency can actually bring together these efforts and make them a whole, and then of course we can start having better impacts from Africa. Of course, I think Telnet of Tunisia currently wants to launch a 30 satellite constellation, but that's just for Tunisia alone, and not for Africa. So I think constellations are really the way to go. Like Charles rightly mentioned, the more satellites you have covering a particular area, the more revisit times you have, the easier it is for you to be able to access this data, and of course, the better results we see from the African space industry.
Yeah. Thank you, David. And I'll bring the same to Guido and also touch on your green tech, and then we will jump into Q&A.
So yeah, constellations, African Space Agency. Sorry, guys. Okay, let's start with the space agency. I think it's a good idea actually to coordinate activities. Charles, I mean, it's easier to have a continent-wide approach, and definitely the agency will play a crucial role. But I can only recommend, don't make the same mistake as the Europeans, because they have created a space agency and the whole continent is only focusing on institutional business. What is driving the continent today is commercial business, because satellites get produced commercially. Only a few of them get actually on an institutional umbrella. So I think it's a pretty interesting approach, and I would rather see that I'm extending this kind of base and grow further companies who actually are going into this direction, coming up with additional applications, with solutions, even solving this issue of constellations. I'm a fan of constellations, don't get me wrong. I think it's actually pretty cool what they're doing at the moment. On the other side, however, I'm wondering for how much longer we actually will have access to space. At the peak time of the constellations, Samsung alone was planning with constellations with the number of satellites up to 9,000. So now we have Starlink, we have Amazon who's getting ready, we have OneWeb, and we have a couple of others that are smaller. So at some stage, I think we have to see that we're rather collaborating on what is existing than that everyone is coming up with its own constellation, because otherwise we're going to stuck on that planet. Might be additional business to remove actually all this crap out of space. But yeah, so I think it is a good idea to look into solutions. I myself had the pleasure with the South African company together to present at the last AfroLink. That was, I think, 2 years ago, the physically one, to present as a teaser a concept that we called IoT for Africa, where we were trying to do some ideation on the concept of having IoT satellites that get produced in Africa, just for Africa. And you don't have the same kind of, let's say, availability of what you would get in the United States or maybe in Japan. you would have maybe just a couple of hours, as you just have described, Charles, with Landsat, but hours. So let's say you have a coverage of 6 or 7 hours a day with this kind of small IoT constellation. At least what you could start already with it from it, on a lower level, and you're building up. The moment where you're realizing, okay, you make some money with it because you have customers, subscribers, you build the next satellite, you build the next one, the constellation is growing. You already have to maintain some of the satellites, maybe get them down again. You're going to get new ones up. So this is how it could grow, and also in the field of a constellation. But I'm back to my full stream from the beginning. I think it can only really cool work if you do the full value chain, because then you have the real cost advantages that you can facing on the continent. You're going to get jobs for the youth who are at the moment studying interesting subjects, but unfortunately the brain drain will catch them because they're going to go to Saudi, they're going to go to the Emirates, to the United States, to Europe, you name it. And I think if you bring this together, maybe the space agency will support this kind of activity. Then you can really make a difference. You can really make a difference.
Thank you, Guido, for wrapping that up. I think it's critical to understand how much of a difference space tech can make for us. And I think this panel gave us a really good 360 overview as to the different applications of space tech and actually how much of a difference we can take it forward, right? There are quite a few awesome ideas regarding the different applications, right? And I think obviously from there, we'll probably jump into the Q&A session before I wrap up, actually, because we do have a couple of questions from the audience, right? There's one that's, this is a long question. I'm going to read out. But into the Q&A session, how it goes, I'll read out the questions and then I'll just direct them to the audience. I mean, to the panelists, not the audience. And then depending on the kind of question, I mean, each and everyone can pick it up, right? But it might be easier because we have 1, 2. Okay, I'll start from the top, right? So this is, on her own, Africa is highly unlikely to undertake cislunar missions. Mr. Joshua Fletcher, CTO and co-founder of Australia Space Industries Limited, has offered Africa an opportunity to be part of his company's 2023-24 lunar mission to extract helium-3. Is any panelist aware of that opportunity? Is Africa even willing to consider cislunar missions? It was a bit wordy, but
but it's fine. I mean, you can Google because there was a mission that was called Africa to the Moon. I don't know if some of you might remember. Actually, it was promoted by the Foundation for Space Development, where I'm belonging to now. It has become a bit more quiet, I must admit this. But my colleagues have looked seriously into the possibility actually to go to the moon. From the African soil, there have been some early preparations and funding opportunities. The founder of the foundation, Jonah Weltman, was actually even going in the media with this and trying to promote it even further. So there have been the ideas. The biggest problem always is actually finding funding for such a mission. If you can piggyback, for instance, in this case, if I understood it right, with the Australians, I think it's a good opportunity. And it's in particular, I think, of high interest to the agencies, like the Kenyan, the Nigerian, the South African, the Egyptian, so the African, because it's more research topic, right? Extracting helium-3, it's interesting. I think a lot of it was even an X-Prize challenge a couple of years ago, if I'm not mistaken. So there's potential to do this kind of activities, but I think it should be we are back to collaborations. It has to be a joint approach on the continent.
Thank you, Guido.
Maybe just a quick one in terms of the implementation there. And that usually comes along because when you're looking at, especially from the angle of government, sometimes the question is, what is the benefit to your citizenry? And maybe that also needs to play into the minds of the proponents of such programs. Because one of the issues has been, like Guido mentioned, those are usually long-term projects. Do we have the funds to send a team to extract helium in lunar surface, or do we need to develop our technology to be able to, like, for example, map our own country? What would we say is a priority? From where I stand, I would say anything that adds value, more especially to the citizenry, would be more welcome. But again, all those opportunities for research also add value because they also build on our knowledge.
Thank you, Charles and Guido. I just noticed that there are actually 2 questions. It would have been easier for even Alan. Alan, if you're there, did that cover your question? Okay. Alan is amused, but I take that as a yes. Silence is always, but mostly consent. Then the next question is actually Alan. You're muted. Did that cover your question, Alan?
We need to qualify that the mission by Space Industries Limited is already taken care of. What the organization is offering is an opportunity for Africa to contribute a remote operations center. It would be in Africa, it would be one of 7, and it would enable Africans to be able to observe and monitor a robot that will be extracting the helium. So there's really no cost element. It's simply that Africa then joins part of what is a lunar mission at very fractional cost. In fact, almost at no cost, because all that one government needs to do is set up the remote operation center, and the company will outfit it with the equipment.
Okay. It seems, Alan, I was gonna say, yeah, seems like Alan, you have a lot of information on this. I would definitely put you in touch with the panelists, and then maybe we continue this conversation. I don't know if anyone has any follow-up answers to Alan's, but it seems like an avenue the panelists would like to explore as well.
And I just want to mention, I mean, it sounds very exciting, but there's almost no costs. Still almost. We're talking about going to the moon. It would be interesting how much it is still, because at the end of the day, it has to be kind of negotiated with funders. Let's call them funders.
Yeah. Thank you, Alan. I'll put you in touch with the panelists. I think the details are also in the Zoom chat, right, Saskia? So definitely reach out and let's continue the conversation. And there's one other question.
Wait, Manny, before you move to the next question, Oluseyi's network is working now, I think, at least on the voice part. And even though he wasn't able to really contribute a lot, unfortunately, to the conversation itself, I'd love for him to get the opportunity to introduce him and the work he does.
Agreed.
So that the audience knows of him and finds value in connecting with him.
Hi guys, super sorry not to be able to connect. How's my connection now?
Awesome.
Perfect.
Okay, good. So thank you. You know, it's a pity I've missed a lot of this, but I'll definitely reach out because I know that the conversation would have been really rich. You know, with the diverse perspectives. I am part of GenSpace. I'm a board member. We have about 69 markets that we represent as part of GEN, which is the Global Entrepreneurial Network, right? So GenSpace believes that space is a location that's open for business, right? And so I'm focused on Africa, and we're trying to sort of open up the opportunities for astropreneurs, right? So steering astropreneurs towards, you know, more impactful work on the continent, enabling global systems, stimulating the creation of startups, especially for Africa. You know, one of the things that we find is, you know, we're right at the beginning, right? You know, Charles and others would have said, you know, a lot of this is happening, you know, with that connection. And some of the forward-thinking policies that some of the countries, Egypt, South Africa, Kenya, sometimes Nigeria, you know, are starting to put forward. So we want to accelerate that and scale it up, right? By connecting, by inspiring, by advising. I think I heard a little bit about, you know, some of the maybe moonshot type things that, you know, going to the moon, you know, maybe building out our own constellation, I think that this is really important for us to look at as well, right? So I take an approach where I focus on, or we try to encourage, both a moonshot approach, because when you put hard things in front of very smart people, and we have no shortage of that on a continent, right? It brings them together around new types of solutions, and I think this is what happened in the 60s, right, with NASA and Russia, and so we have that opportunity, and I think it yes, the costs are there, right, but that's part of the innovation. And then you look at more downstream opportunities like the Earth observation type opportunities. Most of the startups that we're seeing on the continent are focused on this, right? Whether it's agriculture, precision agriculture, whether it's mining, whatever it is, right? Security, and we want these guys to become superstars. We want to scale what they're doing, right? So for me, we need to reduce the cost of data and perhaps maybe the cost of acquiring data, right, from some of the sources that we currently look at for high res imagery, right? So these kind of things are the prohibitive type things that are stopping the lower hanging fruit from really shining on the continent. And these are some of the areas that I want to look at. So constellations, Earth observation, just looking at how do we get more people scaling and providing services across the continent, maybe growing what the market is possible, the possibility on the continent, and then potentially building bridges with Europe and the US. So these are some of the areas that I've been working on. Apologies again for coming in right at the end. But I hope we're able to connect a lot more.
Oh, good, Oluchi. Actually, thanks for being able to at least contribute at the end, right? I know it's one of those, even in the prep session, the internet seems to be functioning perfectly, right? But then it's one of those where I know in tech, you have the proof of concept, right? And then you have the actual demo and it actually fails then. But thanks for joining. Thanks for actually pulling through to do the intro at least. And we shared your contacts with at least the attendees as well, so they should definitely be in touch. Then I'll ping on to the last question we have. It's from Arun. Arun, hey, how's it going? The question is, how is Africa envisaging the recent India-Nigeria collaboration in space science? And I don't know which panelist would like to take up this question. Maybe I'll ping David on this, and if not, or you can hand it on to Charles. Looks keen as well.
I'm not sure what it entails, but I just want to comment on a general one in terms of collaboration, and I want to ping back onto what Guido was saying about the European Space Agency, and I have a different opinion in terms of the value of collaboration. When you look at, I'll give the example of the Copernicus program. What they've done is they have brought together resources into one basket. They have a number of satellites mission, so that they have launched. We have, I think, Sentinel-1 up to Sentinel-6. So you essentially they put that information into one, and they have not been able to use that repository to grow their sector. You have ESA supporting over 200, I think, startups. They have had over 200. They have over 20 innovation centers. They have quite a number of innovation centers because they have centralized information. And that is one of the challenges that you end across. And I mentioned something about data as a service, form as a service, infrastructure service. We put resources together. Like, for example, I'll give the example for Kenya. If you're able to have quite a heavy or unexpected data repository, then anyone within the Kenyan ecosystem would be able to build applications on top of that data, essentially being able to grow. Because one of the challenges you have is you have in Africa, you have one data set in one organization, another data set in different organization. And when you put them together, and I believe that is the value that you would have, even if it was like Nigeria and India, if they were to have access to the data repository or data that would be meaningful for the research, then it adds a lot of value. Especially when you collaborate, when you bring resources together and then you work together to develop systems.
Thank you, Charles. If anyone else wants to put
just to add to
okay.
Just to add to what Charles has said, of course, collaborations at the order of the day, like we have rightly said earlier, a couple of institutions coming together to collaborate. Although one of the things that constantly Africa is policy. Africa needs to get a lot of its policies right. Africa needs to get a lot of its structures right. Africa needs to get a lot of things right for a lot of other things to work. Because these are like enabling systems. They do not just work by themselves. So if there are no enabling systems for these things to thrive, of course, it would just be a much wasted effort. So first of all, Africa needs to get its policies right, its legislature. A lot of structures need to be in place. I mean, one of the reasons why the BERT project was actually initiated was to help non-spacefaring nations, which are mostly in Africa, to be able to develop their own technology. But after most of the project, Nigeria is one of such countries, Kenya, Ghana. But after the project, we really did not hear much from these projects anymore. Why was this so? So one question I want to ask is, apart from individuals or organizations ready to collaborate, what role is the government playing in making sure that the ecosystem is conducive enough for these kind of collaborations to thrive as well?
Guido, you look keen. I just picked you up because you had a smile on your face, like you'd like to tackle this.
I mean, at the end of the day, I think, if I'm not mistaken, what India is doing at the moment is truly capacity building. So even if I'm thinking in the case of Nigeria, it should be more capacity development because the capacity is existing already. But India is a spacefaring nation, and it definitely makes sense to go for this kind of collaborations. And I appreciate what Charles says in respect to the Copernicus program. Because an interesting aspect is, I think Copernicus tried to come up with some regional centers 5 years ago or 6 years ago. They even wanted to bring funding, but it seems that they couldn't identify actually potential locations. So that African countries can use this kind of technology, which is existing already. So I think at the end of the day, collaborations are the key. It doesn't matter in the first place with whom. It does more matter what is in for Africa. Just being a cheap labor on the one side, I think it's not enough. Or offering just facilities for tracking rockets that leaving in Florida. It's also, I think, not enough, because there's so much more possibilities and capabilities. I mean, when Elon Musk was still like a little boy running around in Pretoria, there was already a German chap, the first entrepreneur, you could call him, or what did I read? Astropreneur. He was already launching from Congo back in the days, back in the 70s. He was launching his first privately found launcher. It didn't really work at the end of the day. Maybe some of you have heard the name OTRAC. So OTRAC was a company who was actually trying to develop a totally new kind of launcher technology. But it was an entrepreneur, and where did he start with everything? He started in Africa. He didn't go anywhere else. He wanted to be there. And I think even his last activities were running in Africa. So what I'm trying to say is, think big. Be proud of what is existing. Try rather to combine and bring it together, and then really trying to make a difference. And see how the funding is coming in. If it is now from an institutional level or from a private level. At the end of the day, I think the solutions that should be developed first is solutions locally, because I can still remember when NASA was launching from Kenya. In the beginning, it was just sounding rockets, but then they even launched small satellites. but they didn't launch them for Kenya. They launched them for America. And America is doing it until today, only if you pay for it. So first of all, start to develop where you are and what you can do, and offer even the capacities that you have additionally to paying customers, so that you can even scale up. So I think that could be an interesting and future-related approach.
In fact, before Mani you go, there's a comment
Yes.
Paul has indicated on the chat. Africa needs to encourage and support indigenous African technology design and development of satellites and launching. We have the skills and capacity in Africa to develop our own satellites. We can look inside. We can look within ourselves and see how we can grow our industry and see what we need to do. And interest people to invest. Olushe, it's quite sad that we were not able to have Olushe in the conversation, and he was to bring that dimension on how to attract funding.
Yes.
But funding will come when you get our things in order.
Yeah. So we had a really interesting conversation, Charles and I, right, about how to sort of position some of these opportunities, right. We were of the opinion, right, that there are quite a few PE firms and venture capitalists, right, that have reached out, and there is interest. People are asking, what is interesting in the African space to invest in, and a lot of times, it sort of focuses on the same sort of things, right? There's quite a lot going on within connectivity. I don't know if that was talked about, but I think that going back to for me, like Earth observation, right? I think there's a really big use case, right, for positioning some kind of Pan-African focused organization. I usually advocate for bottom-up innovation, right? We talk a lot about the African Union. I think that once we can get things working there, once there's a bit more understanding at that level as to maybe where the focus areas should be, I think that we're going to hit the stars. But before that happens, right? I think that we need to be looking for opportunities to involve traditional funding and educate them into what the opportunities are on the continent. So, traditional VCs, traditional angel investors who are looking at other technology areas, who have a slight interest, and sort of, helping them to understand, what's valuable, right, and what they should be investing in, based off on the local continental opportunity, right, across, say, agriculture in terms of the downstream applications, but also more upstream opportunities in the long term, which again, maybe the PE firms and things like that would want to play in, because they play at a much larger scale. So, I would like to explore sort of this constellation narrative in terms of satellites as a service, which was something I was talking to Charles about, where all of these different Earth observation countries, right? Companies, startups, right, would then have a cheaper alternative to build the real value, right? That on the continent people might want to invest in.
Oh, yeah.
Where did you put it?
Hello.
Hey, it's that time of the day, right? I think let me just thanks for wrapping up. I think there have been really strong conversations tonight, mainly because we are maybe wrapping towards the end of the conversation. I missed one question though, so we'll quickly touch on this last question and then we have wrap up. Obviously sad to leave, but I guess it's almost end of the event. But Ikyoluwa, I hope I pronounced that right. Ikyoluwa said she's a Futa alumni too, right? And she was part of the Birds project. I don't know if David, you know about the Birds project? Maybe she'd explain a bit more. But she'd like to know where and how a similar project can be executed locally, albeit this time collaborating with a local or continental and preferably independent organization. I think PUTA as an academic liaison can still be leveraged on here. And I don't know if David, you know a bit more about this, the Birds project?
Okay, so for the BERTS project, it was created to help undergraduate students, to help them for knowledge transfer, so that they can be able to get hands-on training to for satellite technology. And I think it was strictly for undergraduate students. So far, I've not heard of any other organization that has you know, if you check through all the universities that have launched satellites from Africa, from Kenya, from Ghana, from Nigeria, they all partook from the BERTS project. So I'm not sure if the BERTS project is for any other local organization, but I think you can check KiboCube though. KiboCube is quite different from the BERTS project. So, but the BERTS project is strictly for undergraduate students.
Okay, and I know Guido and Charles are both heavy into STEM and education and space tech. Do you know about any similar projects? It seems Ikiola is interested or wants to know more.
So like David indicated, BUDS was more of a Japanese initiative supporting African countries, or developing countries essentially, to get access to space. And his question again would be, what do we need to do to have such programs in Africa? And that was what I was alluding to. We have to look inwards and see what as countries we can be able to, what funding can we attract on those areas. I know Egypt, and I saw that during one of the forums that was happening this week, are having an initiative where they were calling it Space Keys, where they have well laid out educational programs, capacity building, and even systems for training on development of satellites. We tried something similar on something under the UNISEC. UNISEC is University Space Engineering Consortium. So they have a small CubeSat that can be used. But my understanding from what Egypt is doing, they have developed that system for themselves and they would use it for training. And we need to look inwards as Africa in our different countries and see what are we able to generate ourselves and develop ourselves. If we have to do reverse engineering, let us do reverse engineering and develop systems that will be able to maybe copy from what BUDS have been able to realize. Because like I indicated earlier, you go out there, you do the training, but you come back home, then if you don't have the technology that you went through, then it doesn't add a lot of value. And maybe we need to look at how do we get that technology in place? Do we need to engage like Olusheye was indicating, funding from external, and maybe we need to build cases for such.
Okay. Thank you. I think one common theme I see across what we've discussed is a heavy involvement in, at least from the education side, as well as collaborative efforts. And really, like I think we all said it from the panels, looking inward, really identifying what the needs are for Africa, and then making sure collaborative efforts address those needs as well. Like there was a lot of enriched conversations here. I will personally follow up with all of you, the panelists, right? Because this is like such an important conversation for me, as well as where Africa can go. And it was such an awesome opportunity to share the stage with you and have a conversation, just chit chat, right? Thank you so much. I'll hand over to Saskia, a member of the ABAWT team, and then our branding and marketing to wrap up the event for us. But it was, like I said, awesome sharing the coffee chat with all four of you. Thank you.
So thank you again for this really, really awesome conversation. It was super interesting. Took a lot of notes, actually. Also, thank you for everyone joining actually the conversation, asking so many questions, making so many comments in the chat. really, really appreciative, super important for all of us to come together actually, and exchange knowledge, share knowledge, and yeah, basically connect. So that's awesome. In order to connect more, I'd actually love to share with you just a quick information. We are planning our next event. You guys can see my screen since I cannot see my screen myself.
Oh yeah, we can see it.
Fantastic. So in 1 month we'll have another meeting that we're currently preparing, but you can already register, so it's up in your calendar on Eventbrite. So where we are actually going to celebrate Africa's future through the power of entrepreneurship. So we'd be happy if as many as possible can join us, and also share yeah, what you believe where the future is for Africa. And then you can always connect with us on the different in the different channels on our website, of course. You can find us also on social media, Instagram, of course, and Twitter and Facebook. And if anyone is interested in actually becoming an ambassador in your country for ABAWT, please contact us. Just send us an email, and we'd be happy to have a conversation on that. And that was basically it. I would love to wish all of you a wonderful evening. Thank you again for taking your time, and yeah, hope to see you very soon.